Okay. A wonderful evening to every single one of us today here at the webinar live stream of PALA. Good evening, welcome back to everyone who came back from our webinar the other day and yesterday. This is Post-Lockdown Landscape Space Sharing in the Emerging Order. This webinar is brought to you by the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, in coordination with the Research and Extensions Programs and the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory from the UP College of Architecture. By the way, I am Balbi Santos. I am a landscape architect and also a member of PALA. This webinar series is part of Focal Point, which is an online discussion series on landscape architecture and other relevant topics. If you want to learn more about Focal Point, you can head on to the Facebook page of the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects. Speaking of Facebook page, we are live streaming right now at the Facebook page of PALA. We are also live streaming in YouTube. If you want to watch it in YouTube instead, you can check it out by typing post-lockdown landscapes PALA in the search bar. All right, this is the third and the final lecture of this webinar series. This webinar series is about discussing how we landscape architects can face the challenges of the new normal or the emerging order, as we like to call it in our title. On Tuesday, we had Professor Vergara, where we had concluded that data-driven design is vital if we want to make a significant difference in how landscape design helps society. Yesterday, we had the esteemed Dr. Patilia, who presented with us landscape design interventions from the perspective of the public health field. And today, our speaker comes from the social sciences field, and he has extensive knowledge in medical anthropology. Later, he's going to talk about how we can link landscape architecture with One Health and Feng Shui. Now, before we begin with our lecture, we would like to remind you a few things. First of all, certificates of participations will be released to you later, only after you finish filling out the feedback form within 24 hours. I repeat, you have to fill out the feedback form within 24 hours of this lecture series, of this lecture. Second, we would like to reiterate that the point of the views and opinions of the lecturers and the reactors are theirs and theirs alone, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of PALA. Next, later on, we will have a Q&A section, an open forum. And if you would like to speak your mind or comment questions, you can leave them by commenting in the live chat feature of both YouTube and on Facebook. And as I mentioned, later we will have two guest reactors who will help us synthesize our thoughts, give their own thoughts, and help us wrap our minds around the lecture today. All right? So now, let's head on to our speaker. Our speaker for this last lecture, he started out as a doctor of veterinary medicine from UP, but he found his calling by taking up Masters in Arts in Anthropology from Texas A&M University in the USA. He has a PhD in medical anthropology at the University of Amsterdam from the Netherlands. His research interests include health and wellness, gender sexuality, anthrozoology, culture and ethics, Southeast Asian and East Asian studies, linguistic anthropology, and One Health. Speaking of, you might be wondering why he's here with us today when he's trained in veterinary medicine and anthropology. Well, his interest in landscape architecture comes from different sources, including a mother who was always fanatical about feng shui, friends in the College of Architecture, and a personal interest in gardening and gardens. But he didn't have time for that since he served as the Chancellor of UP Diliman from 2014 to 2020. He hopes to connect these divergent interests by promoting One Health which he'll explain later, and advocacy in biodiversity, starting with UP itself. He is a firm believer in placemaking as the heart of institution building. In this COVID-19 era, he has been actively helping out in various groups, including the government, to craft a more effective and humane response. He is in trouble now for giving government an F or falpak when it comes to humane approaches to COVID-19. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Michael L. Tan.
You.
Nice to have you here, sir.
Happy to be here as well.
Yes.
Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. I'm still not used to our online things because I can't see you and I can't hear you. Okay,
yes, sir.
we have the PowerPoint on. Kayo nang mag-turn. No? So this is the title page to intrigue you. I'll be talking about COVID-19, landscaping, and feng shui and punsoy. We will find out what punsoy is. No? Next slide, please. Okay, we start out with this concept of One Health, no? Which is international now. The World Health Organization has been promoting it. This particular chart is from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, no? And it summarizes it very well. One Health, the idea that the health of people, pinuuna pa rin ng tao, syempre, is connected to the health of animals and our shared environment. So it's veterinary health, human health, and environmental health. And they have a good slogan here: when we protect one, we help to protect all. It napaka-integrated itong pananaw. No? Next slide, please. Okay, to be very concrete here, no, why is One Health so important? We see the vulnerabilities for COVID-19 reflect to some of the fissures, no, the disruptions we have in the One Health integration. No? We have disruptions in the environment, no? Because humans have been moving into spaces of wildlife. No? We have been edging them out of their natural habitats. No? And some of the wildlife we're talking about are those that harbor viruses, including the many coronaviruses that now are known to cross the barrier from non-humans to humans. No? You may have heard all these theories about it coming in from bats in China, but the latest theory, I just read about this morning, is that the SARS-like viruses, which includes the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, may have actually been in bats in Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar for a long time. Napakahalaga ito. In fact, part of the theory is that people in Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar were probably already exposed to diseases similar to COVID-19. And that might account for the very, very low infection rates in these countries. No? They have very low rates. I mean, I've always been startled also, but hindi nga masyadong kumakalat sa kanila. No? But the whole point is that as humans move into the areas where bats are, or the pangolins, or whatever wildlife you're talking about, then the closer contact also means that we stand a greater chance that one of the viruses might mutate, and then the mutation allows them to infect humans. No? And this is very worrisome because the prediction is this will not be the last pandemic from your coronaviruses. This is not the last. My students keep saying, sir, once in a lifetime kaya ito? I say, I hope so, but it probably will not be. No? Next slide. Okay, the environmental degradation also includes air quality, and there's some studies showing that the vulnerability for COVID-19 infection is higher in areas with poor air quality because the lungs are a primary target of the virus. No? We also know that the human ecosystems, no, including built ones, and this is of concern to the architects, have also been deteriorating in quality, making it easier for outbreaks of diseases, epidemics, and pandemics. And we see that in our urban slums today with our problem in COVID-19. I will tell you, I get the figures every day from DOH, no? And I am always shocked at how the figures are rising. No? They are rising all around UP Diliman, no? In all the poor areas, Tandang Sora, even parts of Loyola, no? And UP Diliman itself, the Barangay UP campus. You see the numbers going it will start mga 25 ngayon, tapos maging 50, tapos before you know it, hundreds na yung ano. The highest rate reported so far are from a barangay in Cebu. They now have almost 600 COVID cases. Can you imagine a barangay having 600 cases? No? It just kept going up. Even during the crackdown, even during the lock-in period, it just kept going up. Okay, next slide. This is my earlier point na, that we have neglected our built environments, especially for low-income communities. No? And so the virus is racing through the urban poor communities. And it's made worse because the government, utak militar kasi, no? They still believe that the solution is to lock in people. No? Literally, they are locked in. No? I don't know if you're aware that people in some of these barangays are not allowed to even sit in front of their homes. I said this is very inhuman, and it is very unscientific, because by doing that, you expose them to even higher risk of infections. No? Because if there's someone nearby who has the infection, ang lapit kasi ng bahay, no? Mag-atching ka lang, aabot yan sa kapitbahay. No? You do not have any way of doing physical distancing. And it's worse in your urban poor communities because the micro droplets stay suspended, no? In the confined spaces. They stay suspended in the air if there is poor ventilation, and therefore more people will be vulnerable to getting infected. No? Okay. I don't know if you're starting to see the connections, no? Architecture, built environments, and COVID-19. Next slide. We also know this is aggravated by the lack of safe spaces outside of the home. In other countries, nag-lock-in din sila, but their communities would have spaces. No? They would have parks, no? Where they would allow a specific time children could go out, another time for the elderly, because they recognize that besides reducing the risk of the infection by the virus, you also get people to get more sunlight and fresh air, which is also important in building up the immune systems. No? So our problems here, we kinulong ng mga tao, increasing their risk for COVID-19, and not only that, we deprive them of nature solutions for a lot of their psychosocial problems. No? It is not surprising that the rates of domestic violence actually increased during the lockdown. The figures are very, very clear there, and it is very, very disturbing, the long-term impact on children. Next slide. Okay, still on One Health, we know that the poor environmental quality, meaning the surroundings, affects the sense of quality of life among people, and that this affects psychosocial health. If you're not happy with where you live, then you're always depressed, and your psychosocial health becomes problematic. But we also saw during this pandemic that people found refuge in gardens, in their kahit maliit lang. I'm always amazed when I go through slum areas how they're able to make little gardens, kung ano-anong ginagamit ng mga lata, mga containers ng gatas, and no matter what they make do and are able to grow plants there. We see that also in condos, and we know that there has been a demand. The demand for plants has increased. I was in farmers market 2 Sundays ago. I could not buy any herbs. I was looking for I was looking for rosemary, and wala, sold out sila. They said the demand is really, really very strong, very high. Okay, other things to point out about One Health. We saw all over the world that during the lockdown, because of the changes in situations, the air became cleaner, there were fewer people out in the streets. Wildlife began to cross boundaries into cities and homes. That was very, very real. And I felt that even in Balay Chancellor, kasi na-lock-in din ako, I wasn't able to move out of UP. At nagulat ako minsan, quick na kwento. I was working, and then I heard the piano playing. And I said, wala namang tao dito, ba't tumunog ang piano? Balay Chancellor has many ghosts. So we live peacefully together, but I never knew them to be musical. So nagulat ako na nagpa-piano. And then it stopped. And then A few days later, naulit na naman ito. No? And I finally got curious. I moved closer to the piano. And then I realized may daga sa loob ng piano. This had never happened before. No? And then in the weeks that followed, I realized that dati kasi may mga mice. No? In the last 2 months, we've had rats. No? Rats are different from mice. No? Mas malaki sila. They're more aggressive. They eat the mice. No? They're very, very destructive. Medyo nag-ano ako kasi baka meron din sa bahay. Di ba? We call them mga kaibigan natin. No? But yes, there are changes. I noticed changes in the birds that come in. All of this, I hope landscape architects will, that you become more sensitive to these changes, no? And that you work with your clients to recognize that. Next slide. Okay. We also noticed that our relationships with domestic animals, no, part of One Health din ito, took on new meanings during the lock-in, no? Lockdown, because they helped us to fight boredom, depression, and anxiety. No? I look that way because I have a dog there sleeping. No? On the negative side, because we were home most of the time, our dogs became so attached to us, and now when I leave the house, she gets an anxiety disorder. No? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So what I did there was to talk with you about COVID-19 and One Health. I want to relate that now to landscapes. No? One Health is really about ecosystems. No? And ecosystems are about spaces. No? Non-human animals, no, transform spaces into places. No? They make spaces into their habitats, their refuge areas, their breeding grounds, nesting areas. No? Humans also do the same thing. We transform spaces into homes, into recreational areas. But we also add on meanings, no, to our, because we have built environments, we add on meanings. No? We create spaces which we consider to be sacred, spaces for learning, spaces for recreation, spaces for remembering, including people who have gone ahead of us. No? Next slide, please. We should remember landscapes are social constructs. They take many forms in different historical periods at iba't iba rin ito sa mga kultura, no? Different set cultures. Cultures evolved their guiding principles for landscaping, no? As in Zen, no? Japanese Zen Buddhism, with their principle of less is more. No? I pirated a picture from the internet to show an example. No? Next slide. But we also recognize that the aesthetic evaluation is very culturally specific. No? Zen may not appeal to many Filipinos who see it as too bare and austere. No? I was in Japan once with some friends, no? And some friends told me, anong maganda sa mga Zen-Zen na yan? Tignan mo, puro bato lang. No? Because it is not in the framework of our culture. No? Lately, of course, we know Zen landscapes have become popular, naging fad na. But I sometimes get alarmed because they're adopted without the cultural context that Zen gardens are also associated with silence, simplicity, and mindfulness. No? So a landscape carries meaning. This is my whole point. Next slide. And we know that landscape aesthetics are shaped by many social variables, notably class aspirations. No? Kaya mga mayayaman ngayon, everyone wants a Zen garden. No? And they forget that if you have a Zen garden, you should be doing the landscaping from time to time, and you do not leave it to the gardener. No? Something important which I wanted to point out, no, is that locally, a nice, not just locally, we borrowed this from the Americans. No? A nice landscape house is defined as one that is clean, no? Malinis. No? And it is often defined in opposition to nature. No? So I actually got this from someone who was working on my house, no? And she actually said, "Sementohin na natin ang garden mo, no? Para mas malinis." No? I was horrified, no? But this seems to be very strong even in the professions, and I hope our landscape architects will correct that. No? Because when you cement things and when you bring in non-indigenous vegetation, you might actually create new problems. No? So I wonder at times, I hope, of course, our schools of architecture will begin to point out that cemented areas are the most horrible things you can do. No? It creates a double problem. First, it creates a heat island. Houses that have cemented gardens, no, are at least 1 degree, sometimes 2 or 3 degrees hot, warmer than in places that where you do not use cemented gardens. And of course, the second point here is that when you cement your garden, it puts a footprint that reduces water drainage so that you increase the chances of flooding in your area and in the whole of the city. Okay. Pero yan nga class aspirations. No? If you are rich, dapat puro semento ang bahay mo, no? Including the garden. We hope to change that. Next slide, please. Our landscape aesthetics actually reflect worldviews. No? And I wanted to introduce here, no? We focused in here when we talk about what we do in landscape, it has to relate to our view of the world, our cosmology, and in particular, who are we living in that world. No? So I'm presenting here a Filipino taxonomy of life. No? Who are our friends? No? Of course, you have the supernatural. God is a white old man, distant. Malayo siya. No? We tend to pray more to the Virgin Mary, to Santo Niño, to the saints, because they move back and forth. They're not up there, hindi lang sa langit. No? They come here, they come down to earth, and they are intercessional. They help us with our problems, right? Okay, next slide. And then, of course, mga tao, mga kapwa-tao. No? But notice, some are less tao than others. We have racial and class discrimination. No? And our spaces are tainted by those perceptions, selective perceptions. No? The lockdown, I'm sure you knew about this, became almost voluntary in your upper class subdivisions, no? Who were just horrified by being surrounded by the poor who they felt would infect them. So they created their own enclaves. I'm sorry about the spelling. Locking out the poor. No? I actually saw this in one of the subdivisions in Laguna. They decided that they would not allow anyone into the subdivision and they would not allow anyone out either. They agreed that they would lock themselves in and they had this delivery service for everything they needed. No? I actually warned them. I said, you're going to find it won't work out. And it came true. No? People started complaining. I was so amused reading their Viber na bakit walang wheat bread ngayon? No? They were looking for stuff na, I think you get the point. No? But the fact is, if you are rich, then you think you can live, you know, shielded from the outside world, no? And locking out all the unwashed peoples. No? That's what's his name? The columnist in the Inquirer used to call them the unwashed masses. No? Okay, even our ideas of landscapes and landscaping, of course, are shaped by human relations. Naku, narinig ko ito sa mga architects at saka ID people, no, na sometimes they'll look at a design, no, and they'll say, ay, ang alabang naman ng decor, no? I don't know if you've heard that, no? Which is their way of saying bagong yaman yan. So I am familiar with architects and landscape architects. No? There's a lot of snobbery going on, class snobbery involved. No? Okay, next slide, please. Taxonomy of life pa rin ito. Siyempre, may tao, may mga santo, tapos mga hayop. No? Animals occupy different spaces, no? Depending on the cultural and subcultural settings. In one of the early accounts written by a Spanish friar about the Philippines, he actually found that people in the Visayas kept pigs as pets. No? They were actually up in the houses with people. And I suspect that they came from Vietnam because there are these cute pot-bellied pigs there. No? They're very cuddly. No? Think about the Philippines. No? Although dogs are pets, in many homes they are kept outside and they are kept kept leashed with a chain. No? But many of us have the pets sleeping in our bedrooms. No? So there are differences in the way we look at animals, and we divide them into wild, domestic, companion animals, or even part of the family. Naku, nahiya ako dito. I was going to put a picture here, a photo, no? Because I found this very cute picture in on the internet, no, of a dog house, no, with a garden on the roof. No, maliit lang dog house, pero sa taas may garden na. And there's a warning there: do not use plants that are toxic to dogs. No, dogs cannot take essential oils. No, so you shouldn't plant lavender, for example, too close to the dogs. No, so calling on our landscape architects, that should be one of your plus points. You should be able to advise people about pets. Babalikan ko yan mamaya. No? Next slide, please. Dagdag pala sa veterinarian. Ask your clients if they have pets and how old those pets are, because they have different needs and requirements. No? If you have a dachshund like I do, be prepared. Your garden will be ripped out. No? Ang dachshunds are the hot dogs, no? Yung mahaba ang katawan. They love to dig up gardens. No? So don't invest in things that might be destroyed by your dachshunds. No? Okay. I'm still trying to emphasize our interrelatedness. No? Next slide, please. Okay. Tapos meron din kung may tao tayo, meron din mga hindi tao, no? Sa Cebuano, diliingon nato, no? They're different from us, and they're environmental spirits with habitats that overlap with those of humans, no? And that is why we get into trouble, no? Like if they are in your garden, then you start to have problems. This is of course the belief, no? And then you deal with former humans, the ghosts, and lately the zombies, no? And they are dangerous because they were humans at one time, occupying human spaces, and they have to be reminded not to come back to their old homes, no? Not into our gardens and adjoining untamed areas. No? Which takes me to the point of a very common perception that people have, no? In the Philippines. No? We do not like places with lots of vegetation. No? So this is of course changing. We know that people love nature now, no? But sa karamihan pa rin, kung maraming kugon, kung maraming ano, when we say masukal, that is equated already with the idea na maraming mga malignant spirits, no? And this is a reality we have to face up to. We are still afraid of nature, no? And it affects the landscape designs that Filipinos ask from you guys, no? Next slide. Okay, and the taxonomy of life, and I've not probed enough into this when I was working on it. I said, teka, ang mga halaman ba do people consider to be life? No? Buhay ba ang halaman? No? I think we need to probe into that a bit more. But I included it anyway because some plants are seen as dangerous because nga they are habitats of the malignant Diliman nato. No? For example, balete trees. No? It's getting dark now. This is the time the Diliman nato come out, right? Next slide, please. Finally, no, yun nga, I miss having an audience I can see. No? In the taxonomy of life, we still have one more that is especially important today. No? And we're talking, of course, about the coronavirus. No? These are human cells that have been attacked by the coronavirus. All the yellow little dots are coronavirus. No? And we know in our taxonomy of life today, viruses and germs are becoming important. People are scared to death now of of germs and viruses. No? And yet, from a biological point of view, viruses are not forms of life. No? They are not classified as animals, plants, protozoa. Wala. No? They are considered to be on the edge of life. No? They cannot live on their own. They have to live within a host species. They are parasites. No? And this is why I keep explaining to people when you when you think about it, COVID-19 is fairly easy to control because the virus cannot live long outside of the body. No? Despite what you read about it's living in plastic for 3 days, that's in laboratory conditions. No? So if we just use our mask and we use hand washing and social distancing, we should be pretty safe. No? So keep thinking of the virus as these tiny little yellow dots. No? Okay, next slide, please. Itutuhog ko ito in a while. What I want to present now is this thing called geomancy. All cultures have geomancy, which is the idea that the positioning of communities, the positioning of people in relation to nature, the geo aspect, determines and shapes your predisposition, your standing in life and all. In Chinese, it's called feng shui, which means wind and water. But really, it is not just about wind and water, but it is really about placements and place makings. You have professional geomancers who have who become very rich, including some in the Philippines, just advising rich ethnic Chinese on how to do the placements of furniture, how to do your gardens. Okay, so we'll get back to that later. And it's all pivoted around the idea of qi or energy, which has to be harnessed properly so that it flows. The qi must flow inside your home to bring well-being and prosperity to people within a given space. Okay, that is what feng shui is. Next slide, please. And it still has many adherents, in China, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Just an example here. This is an example of feng shui. There's a particular hotel there that has 3 towers, and it was designed together with geomancers because these 3 towers are supposed to be metaphors for water, which is all around as well, and it will bring wealth and prosperity to the people around and well-being to the people who live inside the towers. So you're talking about billions of dollars invested into feng shui designs. Okay. Next slide. As an anthropologist, I I'm conflicted. I already mentioned that my mother was a fanatic about it. She used to fight with my father because she was always moving doors, moving windows, and all that. And to top it all, she was not really Chinese. She's a colegiala who comes from St. Scholastica. Believe siya dito sa feng shui, and every time she would consult a new geomancer, she would change a door, she would change the design of drove my father nuts. As an anthropologist, I see geomancy uses nature as a metaphor, and it really is talking about the aspirations we have about human relations. We want harmony, we want to avoid conflict, and we want to generate a good life. And geomancers have the function really of helping us psychologically to believe that the positioning of the kitchen and the bedroom, the positioning of plants outside are going to bring harmony because we live in a very disharmonious world. Next slide. Nabanggit ko kanina, all cultures have their forms of geomancies. Katulad sa Pilipinas nga, examples, the practice of steps, oro plata mata, we want to avoid ending on a mata, which means death, or the bearing of coins in a house foundation. And all of this relates to a broader cosmology of init and lamig, and the need to maintain a balance between the two. Sometimes we combine I'm sorry, what I wanted to refer to, many of you are familiar with the idea, especially as landscape architects, na may mga taong mainit ang kamay, kahit anong gawin niya, patay ka agad ang mga halaman na tinatanim niya. Mga malamig na kamay is the equivalent of a green thumb. And then hangin is also important in our cosmology. Hangin is disruptive. People are very, very afraid right now of COVID-19 because they think nasa hangin. Sa totoo lang, hindi sa hangin yan. Okay? But because we believe in it, we get very scared. And we know, of course, about hangin in combination with lamig, being dangerous. These are all part of our geomancies as well. We also talk about hiyang, which is compatibility or a good fit. Si Junior, hiyang siya kay Dr. Santos, pero hindi siya hiyang sa ibang pediatrician. And the Indonesians also have the term chochok for this, the equivalent of hiyang. Next slide, please. Geomancies are, in a way, when you think about it, a prototype of One Health, because it recognizes interactions of humans, of non-human animals, and the environment. The added component is that in traditional geomancies like feng shui, they see humans and our bodies as microcosms of nature. Parang kung may init at lamig sa labas, meron ding init at lamig sa katawan natin. At kung hindi yan balanse, nagkakaroon tayo ng pasma. Okay? I think I did not have it in the slide, and this is a time to talk about how local geomancy has actually evolved. The first time I saw it was in Quiapo. Di ba sa Quiapo may mga nagbabasa ng tarot cards and all. And then I noticed one stall had their American Tarot, kung ano-anong nakasulat. Tapos may punsoy, no? Punsoy. So tinanong ko yung Alec kung ano yung punsoy. And when she described it, I realized punsoy was the Tagalog rendition of feng shui ng Chinese. No? So there is now a Filipino geomancy that is called punsoy. No? And it is a mixture of the Chinese and the local. Next slide. Okay. Importante din dito is geomancies offer us three options in the way we handle our relationships with the world and with nature. One would be conviviality, which is to live together, side by side, to coexist. No? But unfortunately, this does not seem to be very strong in the Philippines. I blame it on Americanization. No? That's why yung kanina binanggit ko nga, nice gardens in better homes and gardens are achieved by destroying nature. You know, it's all very, very artificial. And unfortunately, that still seems to be a popular mode. And I hope that your generation will start to change this. No? Well, your generation and some older ones like Ma'am Susan, who is with us, she's already started doing this. No? But when we started to urbanize, when we became more westernized, we saw nature as something to be controlled and dominated. No? So yung last point ko dito. No? So we want conviviality, but we're really more inclined to conflict and domination. No? Get rid of the wildlife, pour cement into your gardens. No? A more traditional approach we've always had was appeasement. No? This is in relation to the environmental spirits. May cultural practice tayo of tabi-tabi when we go to a masukal na area, no? Tabi-tabi, tapos kayong mga architects din, before you start to change the landscape, may inaalay nga, may mga atang. No? So again, the three options we have are appeasement, no? Conflict domination, or conviviality. And of course, I favor conviviality, but it's going to be an uphill battle. But it is a battle we have to fight. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to actually suggest na kayong mga landscape architects, you can be modern geomancers, no? With a more scientific perspective. No? And I don't mean scientific, no, boring and stereo. No? Because what you're doing in some ways is what geomancers do. No? Geomancers advise people where to put the plants, where to put the furniture, and you do that as well, except that you don't cite certain principles like your feng shui people do. Okay, next slide. And I want to suggest that you can be very powerful geomancers, maybe even very rich geomancers, if you can help people to understand that gardens are very powerful liminal spaces. No? Liminal are shadow spaces, no? Neither here nor there. Katulad nga ngayon, no? Dapit hapon. No? Actually, gabi na. No? Pero kanina medyo araw pa rin pero hindi pa gabi. No? Kaya lumalabas nga ang diliman nato. No? But gardens are liminal spaces because they are domesticated spaces of nature, but not totally. No? The wild still keeps coming in. No? I'm always amazed. Diba, biglang may uusbong na na halaman na saan ba ito galing? No? Mga siling labuyo. No? Sometimes they come from bird droppings. No? All kinds of the liminality is that you're neither wild or domesticated. No? And in the past, traditional landscaping tried to tame or even to keep out the wild. No? And I am a product of that generation and suffer for it. No? I grew up in a house where nature was kept out of the garden. And the times when nature intruded into the garden, we were always being warned. No? I grew up being warned that spider webs could make you blind. No? Kung may spider webs. Laging nagwa-warning, huwag kang uupo sa may puno kasi may higad. No? And all kinds of wildlife. No? So even in our gardens, which were already manicured and all, we were always afraid of nature. No? Of course, they were always warning us about the balete tree and that there was someone living inside. And I think to some extent, that is still happening today. No? And this is where I'm challenging you to change this. No? That your landscaping must include a way to get people to appreciate that a good garden is both domesticated and wild. Next slide, please. Okay. May konting comment dito. Chinese feng shui, I find totally commercial. No? It's a way to sell all kinds of things like bakwa and yung mga kinakabit na mga mirrors, and often cause anxieties. No? The Chinese feng shui practitioners are a bit like plastic surgeons. No? They make you want more, no? And pay. You have to pay for it. No? And I want you to be partners in promoting a punsoy that is transformative. No? Next slide, please. I hope we can explore promoting the landscaping of gardens as to see gardens as learning spaces and learning opportunities for four aspects. No? As havens for safe placemaking, as hubs for mindfulness, as nurturing places for nurturing experiencing life, and as places for scaffolding for ecosystems of trust and sustainability. And these four came to my mind as I thought about how our deficiencies in One Health um, come from COVID-19, and we face a better normal if we can address, if we, sana maging layunin natin itong apat na punto. Let me explain that. Next slide, please. Okay, first, havens for safe placemaking. People discovered it on their own during the lockdown. No? People had more time to do gardening kahit nasa condo, no? And they realized that they felt safer, they felt comforted, no? In their little gardens. No? So it's not surprising that some countries like Canada, the Netherlands, and the UK, they have systems where they allow urban residents to use small plots of public land. No? Sa gobyerno pa rin, but you're allowed to use a piece of land for a certain period where you can have gardens, usually for vegetables and herbs, because they knew that this was good for well-being of their citizens. No? So I'm suggesting that landscape architects can help people to design nodes, no? To look for the nodes in your gardens, no matter how small, to maximize comfort and solace. No? And to point out the power of minimalism, na kahit maliit ang lugar, marami kang magagawa dito. No? I also added this idea of hidden places. No? It's nice to have surprises in your landscapes. No? Not everything has to be lantad. No? You add some mystery to a place, and that adds actually to the refuge and comfort that people need to have. No? There are biological reasons for this. Second one, please, the second slide. Think of your landscaping as creating hubs for mindfulness. No? When I was chancellor, I promoted a program of mindfulness, which we did in many colleges, helping students to meditate to reduce their depression and anxiety. No? And I'm very proud of the program. I hope it will be continued. No? Mindfulness will prepare us better to connect with people. No? And landscape architects can need to practice mindfulness themselves, learn mindfulness and meditation. Then you can help others to create an appreciation of multisensorial mindfulness. No? I think that should read connected. Anyway, what do I mean here? No? Kasi ang nangyari dito sa physical distancing ng COVID-19, no? All of us yearn for body contact. No? We're all skin hungry. No? We want to hug people, but we know we can't do that because baka may COVID-19. Simple things, we meet someone who we haven't seen during the entire lockdown and we want to shake their hands, and then we have to remind ourselves hindi pwede because we're so reliant on actual physical contact. Now, landscape architects can use gardens to promote the idea that our connectivity is not just through actual contact, but through other senses, no? Through visual, no? Which is often privileged, but we need to add some more. And this is why gardens are so powerful, because you grow mindful because you see gardens. No? You appreciate nature because of the garden. No? Let me remind you also that the gardens are olfactory. No? The smells in the garden are amazing, no? And we need to explore looking into this to help people to become more calm and more relaxed. No? Gardens can be very auditory. I love chimes in gardens. No? You'll find they calm children down. They're captivated. They will stare at the chimes for minutes and then hours if you keep them sitting there. The younger they are, the more captivated they are by the chimes. No? I practice Zen meditation. I'll tell you, one of the practices we have is we sit on the first floor, nagme-meditate, and then at some point, someone may bowls yan, no? The bells are like bowls, and they hit the bowl from the second floor. No? Iba ang dating when you hear chimes, when you hear bells from a distance. It is so much more calming than when the bell is down next to you. And in gardens, you can play with the spaces to play on the auditory, the nearness and the farness. No? Come together to create mindfulness, no? And calm people down. No? Of course, the touch and the, oh, I'm sorry, you don't combine that. The two that are go together are olfactory and gustatory, smell and taste. No? And it's important in children. Let me add here, no? The reason I put tactile and gustatory is because of my own childhood. No? I was just so scared of touching plants and animals because that was the way we were trained. No? Now, our modern times, we want to help people to have gardens where people can go and touch the leaves, can taste the leaves and all. No? But we have this nice garden in the Institute of Biology. No? Whenever we start, the tour guide tells the people, tells the group, no, do not eat anything while you're here. No? And of course, I always violate the rule because I know what you can eat and what you can't. No? And then my students always go, sir, anong kinakain mo? Baka malalason ka dyan. I say, no, this is not poison. No? And you can see that even with young people, they're so scared of nature. No? Everything must be poisonous. Everything must cause allergies and asthma and whatever. No? So let's cultivate a new ethos that will help young people to love nature, starting with the gardens in your backyard. No? In the context of COVID-19, we help people to be mindful, as I said earlier, that with physical distancing, you can still have social interaction. Next slide, please. Okay, gardens are good for life itself, no? For seeing the nurturing and experiencing of life. No? Plan your gardens so that people appreciate it to see the cycles of life. No? From again for children, especially from planting the seeds, they become seedlings. No? They become saplings until they grow full size. No? And notice I did not want to put cycles of life and death, no? Because gardens show what that life leads into another life, no? Especially if you practice composting. The idea of recycling is very concrete, a concrete way of teaching about life cycles. No? And something I discovered during the lockdown when I was in Balay Chancellor, because I was always so busy as Chancellor, but during the lockdown, I had more time to go through the gardens, and I discovered we had so many fruit trees, no? And I realized that you could mark off the year, no? Ano ang panahon ngayon, instead of talking about Enero, Febrero, you talk about, katulad ngayon, panahon na ng avocado, no? We help people to realize that they can go through the year, not just through months, but to talk about fruits and flowers, no? Have you ever thought about why we use Flores de Mayo? Because May is a time when we have the most flowers, no? And it is a good way of appreciating nature and learning about the names of trees out there and what comes around in the month of May. I also have allergy reactions during the month of May because it is the month of Kapok, no? I think this year it was a bit earlier, April. Next slide, please. Still on nurturing and experiencing life, landscape architects have very important role to help people to appreciate the ecologies of life, you know, the interconnectedness. Because when you see the different forms of life out there, you know, like when you plant very colorful, when you have plants with very colorful flowers, you bring in the butterflies. You know? People learn to have ecological gauges. You know, how healthy is your natural environment through the interconnectedness of flora and fauna in the gardens. No? I also believe that the interconnectedness involves gardens that should be connected to kitchens. No? Every garden should have stuff you can use in the kitchen, and also stuff you can use in the dining rooms and in your living rooms. No? Nature flows indoors. No? We are waiting for Pala to produce books that can guide people in here. What plants can you cut and use for indoors? You know, what was it there? What was the at the back? Yung lobster claw, no? Has these long leaves which you can cut and you can use inside in the house, no? Okay, next slide, please. Finally, gardens and landscaping offers us a way to scaffold, no, an ecosystem of trust and sustainability. Um, Involve your clients or call them partners to motivate them to co-create and to maintain the landscapes. No? Discuss what they want, no? But also point out that we want to have new principles. We want to be guided by principles of biodiversity and sustainability. No? Again, the Alabang style is to have very expensive imported plants. No? And it's high time that we impress on them that some of our plants are so desired, no, in the West. And here we are wanting to have their plants like tulips. No? And I think we need to change it. And eventually, it is building, because we work together as in partnerships, we build up the trust we have in each other and an ability to think in the long term for sustainability, which we need so much to do in COVID-19. Next slide, please. Ayan ang COVID-19. Landscaping needs to be transformative in our post-COVID-19 era, no, for a better normal. Ayun, kasing new normal. Kasi parang replay na lang ng mga dating problema. Let's think about how we can use landscapes and landscaping to promote a better appreciation of open spaces. No? It's so very important. No? It's very clear now that as we reopen, we need to have uh, encourage more meetings outside. No, it's safer than doing it inside. We have to banish the air conditioned rooms. No, I refuse to have people infections. No, we have to make people less afraid of hanging, and we have to challenge people's love of crowds. No, diba ang Pilipino, ay, ang daming tao, ang saya, and we rush into the crowd. No? We have to change that. No? We have to make people aware of the problems around confined spaces. And this is best done through landscaping. Um, Look at me living in Balay Chancellor for 6 years. And it was so rare that I went outdoors. No? And I'm regretting that. Of course, I have a nice garden here in my other house, but I wish that all of us can find strength, no, in more open types of environments. This means, of course, working with our architects as well, no, promoting cross ventilation and all of these other anti-COVID measures. No? Next slide, please. Last slide na ata yung susunod. No? So let's develop your punsoy, no, that recognizes local conditions, needs and resources, transforming gardens. That's why I said Pala might want to produce. I've been working with NAPI and others to produce that manual on biodiversity in UP Diliman. What are the principles in here? And to be nice to have your clients have these little booklets to guide them to keep their gardens, that they learn about biodiversity and sustainability and learn about the connections to better health. No? So my parting words here is that landscape architects can promote placemaking that encourages life. No? Placemaking that you can do throughout your life. No? Maraming salamat.
All right, thank you so much, Sir Michael. That was a very, very enlightening lecture, and I'd like to share a bit of my thoughts. And to be honest, I was never really an adherent of feng shui. I always thought it was pseudo science, if science at all.
Yeah,
But
it
the way
is
you presented it,
pseudoscience. Oh,
yeah. But the way you presented this, you gave us a new way of looking at feng shui, not as hard code truth, but as an allegory of how humans relate to nature.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
really, I did notice that more and more we're becoming more detached with nature, and it's only
Mm.
recently that we've become reacquainted with the concept of outdoors as extended indoor space,
Yeah.
aka gardens. Like,
Mm.
I think, in my opinion, I think people, not just people, humanity itself, believe they think that nature is untrustworthy because of
Yes.
its
Even dangerous.
unpredictable
Mm.
exactly unpredictable nature. Like, when the saying "into the woods,"
Mm.
it means going into danger, the unknown. And really, I think
Yeah.
that's what people fear the most, not being able to know. That's why garden styles, like the formal styles of in like the gardens of Versailles, they did
Mm.
that as like an attempt to overcome nature, overcome
Yeah.
this fear of the unknown. But
Mm.
recently, I think we're warming up more to nature. What?
Mm.
Yes, sir. And
Okay.
really, I really love your lecture.
Thank you.
It really. And now, of course, it's not just me who loves your lecture. I think our two reactors also would like to give their thoughts, speak their mind regarding our recent lecture. So we have two reactors today, the same as yesterday. So we'll first start with Dr. Susan Aquina Ong, who is a member and a Council of Fellows from PALA and currently teaches at UP Los Baños. And the floor is yours, Doc Susan.
Good evening. Maraming salamat po, terima kasih. Gracias, salamat po, Chancellor, sa inyong thoughts. Before that, I also would like to show this. When Dr. Tan was giving a talk, he mentioned about multi-sensory function of the landscape. And I found this in my house, which is actually a gift from him. And he taught me how to play it. So you have to do that. And you kind of have to finish the sound till it fades away and gives you that meditative uh, response, or more meditative or mindfulness reaction. And I think that your talk that you gave us tonight was very generous in terms of information, and it made us more mindful of what is going around us. uh, there has to be definitely an appreciation and an understanding of Dr. Tan's concept and framework of One Health, which means he covered the human health, veterinary health, and the built and natural environment health. And actually, you mentioned spiritual health. The unseen spirits are there, and therefore they should be kept healthy as well. And I do not know where it comes here, but I thought that I would add that in your framework. Dr. Tan's talk was at first bleak. He showed us the vulnerabilities of entrepreneur and how they get into trouble because of the limited space and the policy that is conflicting, giving them the order not to stay, just to stay inside. And that is very common even here at the place I live nearby. I see that, and I see my kasambahay, or somebody who helps me in the house, and she tells me of the same experience in their place. Uh, the, their house, she has 17 children, by the way, with one husband and one mother, and you can imagine, but they have a house, two-story house, and that's how they cope. They have, and but they're okay because they live here in Laguna, and the air is much fresh here, or much cleaner than in Manila. And after your talk, you gave us a bleak picture of what's in here, what's happening so we aspire for a better normal. You told the audience that in that kind of scenario, or vulnerabilities of communities, there has to be a refuge of a space, meaning you address this especially to the landscape architects as the professionals, whether it's the landscape architects or the mothers or the wives, they've got to, or the husbands, they have to find a space for refuge, which is necessary, especially nowadays. I could only, in my mind, ask in terms of culture, how many cultures do we have in the Philippines or languages? I was just thinking aloud when you were giving a talk. At least I think we have an average of 175 ethnic groups in the country. I don't know how each group would have a different response to such a thing or to this phenomena at the moment. It's just, I'm just thinking aloud because yesterday's talk was because we are a country of islands, and some islands of have already are still COVID free because we're geographically isolated by waters. I don't know if that kind of physical barrier and at the same time variation or diversity in culture could have a different way of looking at things, or even in the way we look at refuge or the landscape. And as you said, um, landscape comes with meaning, is associated with meaning. I definitely agree with that because and in some countries like Korea, their landscape comes with poetry, even with just a rock. That was taught to me by a professor, the late Professor Song Kyung Kim. He said that even just a rock, he'll accompany that rock to say feng shui. If they call it feng shui in Korea, and in a feng shui manner or arranged according to the vista, according to the wind, according to the sun, uh, with reference to those to the natural setting, and he would create a poetry with the together with the rap. So everything is associate has an associated meaning in that context. And your discussion on Philippine taxonomy of dissecting things like is new to me. I get excited with that. Of course, I get excited, by the way, with anthropology. Alam niyo naman, sir, noon, ang istorya you were my dream advisor for my PhD. I do not know if you remember, but I already submitted something that way. So I did realize that that kind of taxonomy grouping would have the God and the saints, and then there's a certain hierarchy or grouping of this. Then the plants, you see how comprehensive. I thought it was going to be difficult to realize it, but then at the same time, it made it easy to have that kind of system of taxonomy. And you explained to us about the details of how Dachshunds can actually be. That one struck me because I do have a Dachshund as well, and it's true. I could not keep my garden really kept as clean or unruffled. So you really have to consider the behavior of your pets, but they definitely is a good companion these days. They definitely are the best companions, I'd say, to keep you secured, psychologically stable, etc. And I will not forget the project that the chancellor did in UP Diliman, when you find cats and dogs around the campus and you can just pet them. Unlike when some people say, oh, don't touch that because it might give you rabies, etc. So I will not forget that kind of feeling because it makes you feel at home in that campus where it's so wide and big and huge. And so those are the things that I learned today from your talk. And um, you also mentioned, lastly, before I know I have my time limit, um, that there is a tendency for each one of us to be afraid of nature, not to touch the soil, not to touch that plant because there's bulate or there's higad, Uh, I think I do not know where that came from. Could be a Western culture or just through time of development. Maybe I would be interested to know where that fear would be coming from. I remember Rizal's uh, book, reading him at the age of 12. He talked about um, describing the tree at the back of his house where there's um, what is this, yung Philippine myth na kabayo, half man, half horse, kapre. There was kapre and there was, so he actually Jose Rizal described that and in his book. So I do not know if these are positive or part of the creative process of being a Filipino citizen. And then your talk, because it's really integrative. You brought in geomancy as something, as Bobby said, geomancy, not in the sense that it is hypocritical, but or I don't know if the right term, but geomancy as a tool to make things happen uh, the right way, or to make people psychologically more comfortable with the way that things are arranged around them. And I think as a landscape architect, we were taught at the basic that people's landscape architects are to uh, design space for people, firstly for comfort and for convenience, and for, of course, for aesthetics. And for that, I think I'll give the floor muna naman to to the next reactor.
Yeah. Thank you, Doc
Thank you very
Susan.
much. Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Tan.
you.
Thank you, Doc
Salamat.
Susan. Kindly stand by for our Q&A later.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yes, and that is a really nice bell.
Yeah, from Dr. Tan yun.
Mhm.
Mm-mm.
All right. Now, before I introduce the next reactor, I would like to remind our dear audience that you may register, that you may leave your comments, your questions, your reactions, violent reactions or peaceful reactions, whatever. You can leave them in the live chat in YouTube and in Facebook. So we have Dr. Michael Tan here and our reactors to help answer your questions or react to your reaction. So take strike while the iron is hot while they're here. All right. Now for our next reactor, we have Franklin Fontanoza, who is a member of PALA, the former Assistant Vice President for External Affairs. And he is also a member of the Research and Extensions Program and the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory of UPRT. The floor is yours, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Balbi. First and foremost, Dr. Tan, thank you for that very insightful lecture that you just shared with all of us. I just have five main points that I took from your lecture. First one is the word connection. Actually, it's the first time that I heard about the One Health perspective.
Mm.
Um, so it's very interesting to find out that a person is actually connected to non-living things, which is an animal, and how it can be further related to the environment. This One Health connection is somehow new to me, and I very much agree with Dr. Susan Ong that there is a need for appreciation for this type of perspective. Second is I learned that again we are stressing the need for an open space. You mentioned that about, for example, the urban poor communities. They were now, because of the pandemic, they're locked in, and yet they want to experience the space outside just to keep their mental well-being in check. But then again, because of the limited spaces that we have, there is again that striking need to have more open spaces. This is what we have been fighting for here in Pala, and what we have been making sure that we provide this kind of open spaces for the public. And again, you have mentioned this. I think for the continuously throughout the three webinars that we had, the series of lecturers, we keep on stressing the need for these open spaces. And finally, again, you mentioned that to us. Third, we also have discussed that these open spaces can be seen as something that is multisensorial. Aesthetics is something on the first level, but ultimately we want these open spaces to be experienced, to be felt, to be heard, to be to to be experienced ultimately. So I remember I have a classmate in my graduate school in UP. She also took up the Master of Tropical Landscape Architecture, and she also discussed about experiencing religious grounds in the level of having a multisensorial experience. And this is a big space, a religious space. All the more that when we transition into our own private spaces, our own gardens, I think the multisensorial experience of our gardens is heightened. Ultimately, because it's a little bit more personal. As you mentioned, you have a pet, a Dachshund. So here we don't have that luxury. So most of the time when we were back in when physically we're in UP in the College of Architecture, we have like a lot of cats. So ultimately, that is how we find ourselves grounded when we pet the cats. And we have heard of how hard you have been fighting that we have these pets in UP. So we do appreciate that you keep on fighting for those. And I think this personal experience of nature, this has something to do with that ultimately the spaces that we live in, we give we give meaning to them. Like Professor Susan Ong mentioned earlier, that landscapes have meanings. So I think personally, when we talk of placemaking, we see these spaces as something more personal, and then you set in culture, which is another layer, and then you place it in with respect to ecological setting. So that's another layer. And then very interestingly, you've set all these images to us and put it in terms of feng shui. So I actually was hoping that I was waiting for a punchline when it comes to the piano making a sound. And I thought that there will be a punchline that it's actually a ghost, but apparently it's not. So I love hearing stories about that. But I don't want experiencing those things. So, but anyway, ultimately, we continuously work with all these notions that feng shui can be practiced and can be utilized to our advantage. I remember even the use of native species. I remember taking Dr. Susan Aquino Ong's for my first class in graduate class. She told us that the Philippines is actually part of the Coral Triangle, which is like we are the center of the Coral Triangle, which is boasting of a lot of biodiversity by species. No, so again, when we encounter all these topics of being safe from the pandemic and finding cure for the pandemic, ultimately there is this need to hopefully there will be this need to experience the open space in a different way in the future. So thank you, Dr. Tan, for that very insightful lecture, and hopefully we'll be hearing a lot of this after your discussion with us today.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for your insights. Please stand by for the Q&A later. Sir Michael, what do you have to say about these reactions of Ma'am Susan and Sir Frank?
Nag-notes nga ako. Nag-notes nga ako dito. No? I just want to start off yung iniisip niyang kabayo nga na ano, no? It's the tikbalak, right? half human, half horse. No? But it did come to me also, even when you look at the tikbalang, example din yan na I really hope to be able to work more closely with the College of Architecture, stuff that we can bring into the curriculum. I believe every degree program must include Filipino mythology, must include, everyone should learn the names of our trees, no? Mga puno natin. No? I have met students in nutrition, no, sa home economics natin, who have never seen a sayote na totoong sayote. They have eaten sayote, they have not. The detachment from reality, kasi taga-syudad na and they grow up in condominiums. It's very, very alarming. No? But I mentioning the tikbalang, kasi when you talk about the tikbalang, so interesting, di ba? Kung umuulan at may araw,
Yes.
anong nangyayari? May wedding na tikbalang, di ba? Because the tikbalang represents what should not be, no? Kung kabayo, dapat kabayo. Kung tao ka, but ito't kabayo at saka tao. It's similar na kung may araw, hindi dapat may ulan, right? So kung may araw at may ulan, di parang may nangyayari din sa na anomalous, which is the tikbalang. But you see, this whole cosmology is so important. We have to understand what exists in our local culture, and that these are things that bring life to life, no? And for example, if you're in the garden, when I'm in the garden with friends, and there's yan nga, may araw nga at saka umuulan, I always crack that remark. I'll say, naku, may wedding naman ng mga tikbalang, no? And people are so amused, and we open up the conversation, and I hope we can do much more of that, no? I don't know if I heard you right, Susan. You mentioned psychic citizens. Did I hear you right? Did you actually use the term? I'm not sure. Anyway, I do like the idea of expanding citizenship. I will tell you, I don't actually believe in the supernatural. I'm a very rational person. But as an anthropologist, I talk about it all the time, and my children are being raised they hear all these things, and they, rather than scaring them to death about it, diba? Ayaw, may mumu, may it's better to just talk about it, and that it's part of our realities. No? What I did want to bring about, though, especially in relation to landscape architecture, no? One thing that we should bring in our taxonomy of life, ironically, would be the dead, and not the ghosts, but our departed, the people we love and who have gone on. They should always be part of our lives. And I suggest to landscape architects, ask your clients or partners to tell you what places in the garden have special meaning, not just for themselves, but for people in the family and people who have gone ahead. Like I had the garden here landscape right before I moved back in, which was just last weekend. Zaira was the one who, the reason I was rushing it is because this is the house where my parents live, and they passed away 2 years. I did not want to move back in because I felt I was unprepared. I took care of my mother for 8 years. 8 taon siya, may dementia, and I did not feel prepared. But now that the garden is there, I know she loved the garden, and now that the garden is there, it is a place, may place making na I can tell nanay, nandito ako, bumalik na ako, and it's important. The bowl that I gave to Ma'am Susan, I gave it during a memorial service for Perry. I think bells are so important in all cultures. We should have bells in all our gardens. It can be a bell at the doorway. Just everyone who comes in can play the chimes. It's to call out each other. So examples lang itos na pwede natin gawin. May tanong din, I'm sorry, medyo matagal tayo kay Ma'am Susan kasi marami siyang points din. The fear of nature, I think we suffer from it more because traditionally takot din tayo we're afraid of nature. That kaya may tabi-tabi, di ba? Lalo pa mga lalaki. It's also, with my son, I'm always telling, nagtabi pa ka ba? Ay nako, dada, alam ko naman hindi ka naniniwala. I said, yeah, but you never know. Baka may higad nga, baka may langgam. Uh, it's not really ano kung namagangan. So traditionally we have it. What we got from the Americans was the idea, though, that nature is there to be subjugated. Diba? Control it na. No? So everything has to be cut down. Everything is. I remember many years ago, I think 30 years ago, I was in Lake Tiboli, before people were going up there. And there's this empty lot, and there was a sign that said, the future site of the municipal parking lot. I mean, parang progress is measured by parking lots. Don't you think it's sad? No? And I would never go back to Lake Tiboli. It's so very different from 30 years ago. No? Okay. Kay Frank naman, all the points you really reiterated nga, and something I'm getting from you and Balbi nga is we're very ambivalent about feng shui nga, no? And yet, let's face it, your clients believe in it. No? And I'm beginning to find mas marami pang non-Chinese ang naniniwala. Ang mga Chinese iniiwan, pero yung mga Filipino are accepting it. Kaya may Chinese New Year holiday pa tayo. And that's really just so SM can sell more bakwa. Those parts. And I feel it is what I'm hoping landscape architects can do is bring out the good qualities of feng shui as a way, as a respectful attitude towards nature, not one of fear, but as a recognition that we need to work with nature. Ano again sa landscape architecture and architecture itself, can you find ways to allow the wind to come into the house, and be really good at it to bring in not just the wind, but to position it so that it brings in the scent of a particular plant that is out there. These are the challenges. And kaya I would just say na nga na, in relation to Frank's points nga na, we may have to unlearn a lot of things first. No? And I'm depending on you guys as faculty members. And, one of my projects after I retire was to actually write about how we can transform feng shui nga. No? Pero ang problema is I don't think I will ever retire because there are always so many things to do. No? I'm helping to design a school in Tagaytay. No? There's a small group that's putting up a performing arts school. No? And again, I went there and they said, you help us to make it Filipino. But I ended up talking about the architecture. I said, you don't have cross ventilation. You're going to have students coming down with COVID-19. No? And they're going to put 8 students to a room. No? We have to end that. I think that's so inhuman. Yung Centennial dorm, I was so upset when iba 6 yung sana. You should not have dorms with 6 people na. Kasi every time you have someone who gets 6, times 6 na yan kaagad. No? And they did it because now that was the cost-effective way. I said in the long run, 6 people, they will kill each other, which is what was happening na nga. No? You cannot put 6 people living together, no? And sharing one bathroom na nga. No? That was the other thing. I don't think bathrooms in dorms should be inside the rooms. No? It should be outside. No? Because when 6 people are lining up for that one bathroom inside na mabaho at maano, it's just not conducive. Yeah. I hope na, Frank, na and then that's one of the things. Something I failed to mention, no? Yung sa presentation was more, I think you might have gotten the impression it's more for homes. No? But I think the landscape architects, of course, you play such a great role in terms of office and workspaces and in schools. UP so badly needs better landscape architecture. No? Our places are not healthy because the landscaping is not good. No?
Ano pala, sir? Palagay ko it's not alone.
Aware of the
lone solution of the landscape
architecture debate.
The landscape architects have also to work with the one budgeting it. Higher policy.
Lowest bidder lagi. No? Yeah. And then the ones who can afford, like Ayala naman, they get the wrong landscape architects minsan. I'm glad they're picking up. They're getting UP people now. I think Zaira did something.
And they're into indigenous planting also, or native.
Yes,
plant.
at least. They've been very supportive.
What I like about your talk, by the way, was where you mentioned these local terms like hangin, lamig. It's not I think other countries like Indonesia have that also, diba?
Yeah, malakas pa rin. No? Their architecture is wonderful. No? All their houses have cross ventilation, ventanillas.
Mhm.
We got rid of those in our bungalows. That's why ang init. No? Why am I talking about that? You guys know that.
No, when
Oh,
you
but
relate
the role, yeah.
concept,
Mm-mm,
anthropological
mm-mm,
concept sa bahay, and then also to the human body, that becomes a very integrative
mm-mm,
discussion.
yeah.
Exciting to me. Mm.
Pero
The
minsan
concept.
pala, naisip ko, baka natatakot din ang mga tao sa ventanilla kasi takot tayo sa aswang, baka pumasok sa ventanilla ang mga aswang. Diba, they're on the rooftop and they come in. No?
Ah,
I'm being naughty. But don't fail to discount that, why are houses designed in a certain way as well. The
mm.
spike on top. Some people tell me it's for the aswang because yung aswang lands on the roof. Mm-mm. Okay. Naku, I'm doing all the
Yeah,
talking, kayo pa rin.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your very wonderful insights and conversation. It was really mesmerizing to watch you three just conversing. And but we're kind of pressed for time, and we have a lot of questions to go through. People like me, the audience are very mesmerized, very engaged with our discussion, and so we would like to move to the next part, which is
Yes.
the Q&A.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
our first question comes from Miss Nikki Plancia Bautista,
Mm,
Chancellor Tan. What is your opinion on the public now being discouraged to leave their homes and going outdoors due to COVID-19, therefore further fragmenting man's relation to nature and the outdoors? Thank you.
I know Nikki. No. Uh, I think I know which Nikki this. Anyway, actually binanggit kanina ng Balbi sa introduction. No? I'm in trouble now because in a webinar yesterday, I gave an F to the Philippine government's COVID-19 response. No? And I said F means palpak. No? And one of the main reasons there is talagang utak militar eh. I mean, nowhere in the world do you send in tanks, armored personal carriers ang pinadala sa Nabotas at noon sa isang barangay sa Tondo just to enforce the quarantine. This is stupid. I'm sorry, but it is totally stupid. You do not need tanks. No? I'm not surprised soldiers and police are now coming down with COVID-19. You send in Tondo, they sent in 200 people and ended up arresting 800 people. I'm sure they passed the virus around themselves. No? But the worst part there, I think this is really inhuman, which is why I gave them an F, no? Is that their interpretation of quarantine is sa loob ka lang ng bahay, pati sa harap, hindi ka pwedeng umupo sa harap ng bahay mo. You get arrested for that. No? And that is stupid. Again, I rarely use the word stupid because I'm raising children right now. But it is wrong because in terms of public health, you are transmitting the virus if you have someone who is infected inside. Tapos hindi siya makalabas pag nag-ubos siya. Mga ibang tao sa bahay, we know how small those places are, no? 10 square meters, 14 square meters, no? Tapos nag-atching siya, aabot yan sa kabila, no? And this is why I have been following the figures. Ang bilis tumaas ang mga ang mga rates ng infection. So it is not just a violation of human rights, it is unscientific. Nikki, you're the doctor, right? Okay. I'm not sure though. Oh.
Thank you, Nikki, for that very wonderful question. All right, so next question we have Maurits Claire. What are the basic elements you can suggest that we all need in our garden, aside from plants po? Elements that you think we should have to help mental health po. Thank you very much. It's really an amazing talk po. Hihi. I hope I can see your garden. Hihi. This person's a big fan of your garden, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have wanted to talk outside nga pero madilim nga. Well, then napag-isip tuloy ako. No? I said, what else would you have in a garden besides plants? Then I said, oh, silly, I forgot nga, no? The rocks and, when you talk about Zen gardens, and there's so many additional things. My only advice, we go back to the point again. Ask your clients what are important in their lives, no? And how might we want to integrate some of those things. Kasi gardens are there for remembering, no? And you need to be able to put the place markers there, something that tatay loved. No? Of course, you have to figure out how to blend it in. No? This I learned from one of my students, si Ache Florendo, no? Who is in ID, no?
Yeah.
Design nga, no? Because she was my advisee in her dissertation for Philippine Studies. One of the things she found, her work was on the accessorias in Sampaloc, no? And she was interviewing one older woman. What she did in her dissertation, and I hope you can do it with your students, is when you visit someone, you walk with them from the entrance, you walk through the house, you tell your informant, uh, tell me what are the important places in your home and why they are important.
The
And with this
narrative.
one woman, when they stepped into the house, she stopped immediately, no? Sa bungad ng bahay, sabi niya. Ito ang pinaka-importante para sa akin kasi ang bumabalik dito, nung maliit ako, nag-aaral, pag-uwi ko, pag dating ko sa bungad, naamoy ko kung ano ang niluluto ni nanay.
Ah,
Can
nice.
you imagine that, no? So that is the place she loves. No? So that is placemaking, and that's what I was trying to do for 6 years in UP. You know, when our students go back, what are the places they'll remember, and what do they associate it with? No? First love, broken love, at kung ano-ano pa kung ano dito. No? That's
If
the
I
thing
may,
in gardens, when they fell in love, when they, the summer of 2020, whatever.
yeah, if I may share po, I did a research on what are the elements. This is my master's at the University of Melbourne, and what are the elements that excites these students in three campuses: Melbourne Uni, Monash, and La Trobe. And the answer was the same unanimously: water element, something that attracts. Because water kasi is life, and even just a basin of water would make it attractive. That's why during the COVID period, I saw in the internet some people trying to put water in batya just to attract birds.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
That's
would
wonderful.
say, so ano yan, founded on research po yung data na yun.
Mm-hmm. To remember
This is
that.
All right,
Water for
thank
the
you, ma'am.
birds.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to that wonderful question. And next question coming from Rachel Aglipay Kayako. Any thoughts on converting our basketball courts into gardens or pocket gardens? Given that instead of parks, LGUs promote the developments of courts or multi-purpose halls as part of their campaign platforms. What do you have to say about that, Sir Dan?
Ay naku, matagal na ako may gripes sa mga basketball courts na yan. Hindi. I've always felt bad in the first place. No, when you go, maraming mga towns natin na you go there and you do not find children's playgrounds, right? You do not have public parks, but what do you always have? The sabungan, no? The galleria. No? And it tells a lot to visitors from overseas what our priorities are. Inuuna ang sabong sa playgrounds ng mga bata. No? And then of course, the basketball court is very ubiquitous. No? And para sa akin kasi okay lang kung multi-purpose siya. And in most places, it is multi-purpose. No? And I love the transformation of basketball courts na they're supposed to be basketball courts where in the end, yun nagamit sa mga beauty contest ng mga bading. No? So it is very gender flexible. No? And I always talk with barangay captains and I tell them na okay lang mag-basketball yung mga lalaki ninyo. Pero payagan naman ninyo mga kababaihan na mag-study din ng activities, mga bading, LGBT, and all of that. No? So, it is multi-purpose quite often. But yeah, why not? Why not encourage people to start gardens, no? Around the basketball courts and multi-purpose, it really the challenge now with a better normal is this is the time for us to point out that COVID-19 was not just a virus. It came out from environmental destruction, from the neglect of human health and neglect of our human settlements. No? And what can we do now? No? It's time now to prepare. Can we have that public park for our elderly and for our kids? No? I know that anong barangay ba yan sa loob ng UP? Actually, hindi siya barangay, sitio yan ng UP campus. Yung sa basta there's Letter P, lumatanda na. Anyway, they have a park for senior citizens. At nakasulat, for senior citizens only. No? Ang liit-liit, but that means a lot. No? And it is landscape, no, in their own way.
Mhm.
So let's try to encourage more of that. The senior citizens need their space as well. Eh. I have to tell you also, because I work in senior citizen programs also, no, and one of the things we were really worried about was we had this program with St. Luke's na dancing classes. No? They learn waltzes, they're real dances na, no? Because this is to help their memory. When you have to memorize steps, that helps your memory. When the lockdown came, the barangay wouldn't let us go back in. So 4 months silang walang dance lessons, and we're really, really worried baka nag-cognitive decline dito. We hope to get back in soon. So if we had the open parks, we could have had a continuation of the dancing classes. Examples again why we need you guys to push for that.
Wow. Thank you, sir. Sobrang that was amazing.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah, Nikki, I'm sorry I got you
Yes,
confused. No?
yes, nag-reply. Nikki replied to your comment. Thank you, sir. Not a doctor. I'm a landscape architect po. Thank you. An honor to have listened to you. May we all work together with policymakers to successfully work for a physical solution to our current pandemic problem specific to our beloved country.
Correct.
Nikki.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Nikki, for that. And thank you for really engaging with us. Now, next question comes from Mr. John G. Amar. Is it exciting how landscape architecture can actually be a discipline of parallel universes? And how landscape architects can act Doctor Strange to heal urban landscapes? How do we create a balance of keeping the landscape safe for human use while allowing nature or biodiversity to coexist naturally? Especially during the recent pandemic, can we say that one of these concepts should be the priority over the other? What are your
It
thoughts
should
there?
it should not be a choice actually. I mean, precisely that's why we say one nature. Nga. When you promote one, you're promoting the health of all, of animals, of humans. We should not see it as oppositional. Eh. One of the examples that comes into my mind, we think it's oppositional because we were raised in that way to see it as a battle between culture or between society and nature. Example na dito, children's playgrounds. No? I don't know if it was mentioned when we were in taking architecture. Nga, no? You notice that most playgrounds use the playground equipment are all like yung steps, equal steps yan, di ba? Everything is very measured. No? The Danes, people in Denmark, there's a group there that are promoting their playgrounds, try to mimic nature. No? So, yung steps pataas may mas malapit, may mas malayo. Ang punto nila dito, in nature, nothing is symmetrical and equal. So by getting children to think that you climb things, everything's going to be symmetrical, you actually put them in danger. So you mimic nature by showing that climbing something has uneven steps, put in a lot of changes in elevation, no? Put in rocks and all of this, no? And that way you get children to adapt, realize that play is also an interaction with nature. No? Again, it sounds so simple, but I think the Japanese are doing something similar as well.
Yes.
Mga Hapon pa naman tend to be so straight-jacketed, no? But they can be very good with preschool, mainly because they have no more children. No? So their children are so precious, no? So they're always thinking of new ways. No?
Yeah. Well, I do agree that we have to reject this false dichotomy between nature versus humans, because the truth is, the human world and the natural world are intertwined. One cannot live, humans cannot live without nature, and in these days, kind of vice versa. And I really think that through landscape architecture, we can help return this appreciation for nature.
Yeah, and to see
Yes.
them as that nature
Allies.
is a source of health. Nga, no? Yung when my mother kasi had Alzheimer's, no, and at one point the geriatrician told me, we need you have to expose her to the sun every day, you know. And the first time I did it, my neighbors came up to said, ang tanda na ng nanay mo, ba't nakabilad siya sa, sa araw, no? And I said, I'm giving her vitamin D3, no? And now it's such a fad, no? Everyone's taking vitamin D3. But you get it from the sun, no? And the elderly, actually it improves their condition to sit out in the sun. And that's why I said the current lock-in policy is so bad. Diba senior citizens hindi pwedeng lumabas sa bahay eh. Ako medyo pasaway nga. Anyway, if you keep them inside the house, they end up depressed, they end up everything. Okay. Naku, I'm going to get into trouble again with the military here. Okay.
Thank you, Sir Tan. Thank you, Sir Frank and Ma'am Susan, for those. So we're just gonna run through a few more comments. No need to react to them. We just want to highlight these interesting comments from our audience, our wonderful audience. First is from Ma'am Edra Belga, that there are also plants believed to invite good spirits and ward off bad ones.
Okay.
Right. From
But don't you think it's nicer if we can tell people all plants are good? Diba?
That's
Ma'am
true.
Susan, wouldn't it be better to say all plants are good? No?
Yeah. But some of them are poisonous.
Yeah.
They have their own function.
Yes. Next with Jer FP, Jojo ba na iba pa din ang natural. That's what we were trying to say.
She prefers the natural garden. Jojo Navarro is from Australia pa.
Yeah, I think she was replying to Jojo Navarro's comment. Anyway,
I just have to comment. Sorry,
ahead.
can I just comment on that?
Go ahead.
As anthropologists, we're always monitoring what people are saying. And something that really shocked me. I was buying orchids from someone in White Plains, no? And then he showed me a plant. He said, "Naku, bagong develop lang ito, di ba? Ang ganda niya, di ba? Parang plastic." Ang ganda niya, parang plastic. It tells us something. It tells us something is happening when plastic is maganda, no? Okay.
Well kept siguro. Ibig sabihin.
Yeah.
This is from
the attempt to strive for a parang man over nature dominion. Anyway, next is a comment from Sir Dan Villajuan. The decision makers within developer clients should be listening to talks like this. I 100% agree with this. Yes.
Don't worry, I have a webinar with Ayala soon.
That's going to be exciting. Later on, sir, during your final thoughts, you can plug that in if you desire.
Yeah. Actually, Ayala naman somehow listens.
Ayala's progressive eh.
With Ana Gonzalez there, I think she influences their major decisions in terms of how they look at the landscape or how they treat the landscape. In fact, si Ana, alam ko, pinapabakbak na niya mga simento.
More green space.
Yeah.
That is awesome. All right, next comment from Manang Seset. Salamat po sa lecture. Thank you for the lecture in English. Watching from Africa.
Hello.
Apparently, we have international clients, audience. And hello to all you in Africa and other countries. I'm glad you are here with us today in our lecture. From Kathy Desiree Nadal. That is true. Thank you, Dr. Tan, for reminding us of the values in our non-human encounters. These contacts are indeed helpful in transforming spaces to places, even with this baffling pandemic in place.
The unseen. I think she was talking about the non-human encounters or the spirits. That's Kathy from nasa Europe yan, di ba siya? Tama ba, Frank? Scotland.
She's finishing her PhD. Yeah.
Interesting.
In Edinburgh.
All right. So I guess that's the last of our comments. Now to wrap this up, first I would like to hear the final thoughts from Dr. Susan, then Sir Frank, and then finally Dr. Tan. So, Ma'am Susan, your final thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Indeed, geomancy can be a tool, as emphasized by Dr. Tan, a tool to make humans and nature come together or work together, like involving the wind, the direction of the sun, and the way we view things and how it affects the psyche of the humans to make it comfortable. So it doesn't have any conflict at all with what the basic goal is of landscape architects are taught by the West. So this Eastern concept of geomancy or pungsoy in the Philippines, as we call it, is not at all new. No, it has been there like since time immemorial. Yet we now have to use it as a popular tool to make things work in peace and in harmony. And
Mhm.
I would like to say that I love the talk of Dr. Tan. I'm very grateful to, and I'm very honored to be part of this. Having him here about the local words of hangin, lamig, hiyang, has brought me into another level of remembering the concept of maginhawa,
Mm,
maalinsangan, all those
mm,
words that are Filipino, which defines, I do not know the right way or the exact way of trying to translate them in English, but there should there is such a feeling that when you mention all these words, it gives you that description of maginhawa is very natural to us because it talks of how people feel towards the environment. And I think that's the whole point of the discussion, talking about the liminal space and trying to find the natural and the not so natural or what is human built among us and making this all together and seem interwoven and like that sign of the yin and yang, it's like a
mm.
unity of the opposites. So yun ang nakita ko sa takeaway sa talk ni Dr. Tan. Kahit ang haba-haba, meron siyang integrative framework to tell us what's his story. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doc Susan, for your thoughts, final thoughts. Sir Frank, give us your final thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Balbi. Again, once again, we are very thankful to Dr. Tan for this chance to hear your thoughts regarding this topic. And hearing Dr. Susan Aquinoong now makes me want to, makes me even miss home more. Um,
Mm,
I've been away from family since the lockdown, and since I needed to finish my thesis and all, and then we wanted our mom to be secured. I mean, not really part of here in the centralized COVID area. So we really preferred her to stay in our home outside Metro Manila so that she would be enjoying more space, to enjoy gardening. So ultimately, when now that I've heard your discussion, and then I keep on hearing Dr. Aquino's thoughts, um, it makes me want to run home as soon as the pandemic is over. I also I'm thinking of this thing that we should not be afraid to get our hands dirty. Um, Pala
mm,
has continuously been working and doing that ever since. Like last night, I mentioned about Pala having this project of the Lunti ang Pook, in which we enjoy the community to design open lots for an edible gardening using these native species, etc. And then just recently, I think Pala had this design challenge wherein I think they designed a certain limit of like 2 by 2 meters or something like that. And then they were able to come up with several designs. So ultimately, Pala has been pushing forward for these designs that ultimately would feel that we are more connected to nature. So hopefully, the profession and future generations would be more appreciative of what landscape architects do, and hopefully we'll have more of these health generating thoughts in the future. And hopefully after the pandemic, we'll all be safe outdoors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
thank
you,
you.
Sir Frank, for your final thoughts. Sir Michael Tan, your final thoughts.
Yeah.
We would really like to hear.
I'm running through my phone kasi for yung sa notes ko eh. I suddenly remembered that I started taking notes. I'm also relating to Frank's point too, and there's someone who was asking kung may libro na dito, no? And uh, it's not showing up right now. I know it will show up right after this is over. No? Pero matagal na ako may balak din. But as I said, ang balak ko is after I retire, which is a long way off. Maybe never nga. To do, to take off on the feng shui theme na nga, how might we want to develop this, to develop a Filipino punsoy or whatever there. But it could be a project of pala, no? If it's something you want to do, we can hold more roundtable discussions just to get people's ideas together, no? Um, and because I think landscape architects will also need some need a guide as well, no? I mean, how are you going to guide people if you haven't started the process also of understanding some ecological principles and then relating it to Philippine culture, which is really what feng shui is, no? Understanding where people are coming from. Um, so let's just keep it in the back burner for now, but I think it's something that could develop, no? And it will be useful for people. No? We have all kinds of crises. I just keep going back again because from day one of the lockdown, I was just so affected by it because the first maaga lang ang dami na kasing mga problema na lumitaw. No? Very early, realized one of the problems now was that people were dying and their relatives could not see them. I think you know the policy kasi especially in the early days kasi wala pang testing, it would be presumed COVID yan. At kung COVID, libing ka agad or cremation ka agad. Ang dami kong kilala who never got to see their loved ones. No? And we had nothing to offer them. We have no publications to offer them how to grieve without the dead there. No? And that was where I said, naku, buti na lang ang parents ko namatay 2 years ago. I don't know how I could have coped if they died during these times. So we have to be prepared for this. I hate to say this, but this will not be the last pandemic. No? Kawawa kayong mas bata. This is not a once-in-lifetime thing. No? And let's hope that Pala and landscape architects will be there not when the pandemic happens, but you would have contributed so that when the next pandemic or next disaster comes around, you would have contributed in terms of public parks, of safe spaces, um, and you can say that we learned our lesson from COVID-19, and that is, and because we're now all doing feng shui in our own scientific way. Yan lang mas topic ko for now.
Thank you, Dr. Tan, for your insights, your final thoughts. Doc Susan, Sir Frank, thank you for being with us as reactors, for helping catalyze conversation.
Thank you.
Sir Tan, once again, thank you. Thank you so much for letting us pick your brain, letting us listen to you speak your mind. And I think everyone, including everyone in the audience, picked up so much in knowledge and appreciation for landscape architecture and the not so empirical sciences like feng shui. Feng shui is not science, but you get the point. We are all appreciative of your work, of your being here. And to all of you, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And to you guys.
All right. Goodbye, sirs. Goodbye, ma'am.
Bye.
All right. So that's it. That is the end of the third and final lecture of this webinar series. Now, before we end this live stream, I would like to say a few final reminders. First, feedback form. Remember to fill out the feedback form if you want a certificate of participation. The link is placed in the comments below. It's also live streaming here in the bottom of the screen. So unless you're here just for the sake of knowledge, fill out the feedback form within 24 hours, mind you, so that you can receive this certificate of participation. And finally, I would like to thank the Research and Extensions programs and Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory, or in cooperation with PALA, And I would very, very much like to thank the Pala board for making all this possible, because without their help and coordination, these live streams would not these live streams and lectures will not even come into light. Thank you to all of you. So that is it. I hope all of you have learned a lot. Thank you so much for coming and watching us here online, and for asking all the questions, and for being really receptive and being really into our lecture series. Again, I am Balbi Santos, and we are now signing off. Thank you.